Compañeros, welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast, the podcast dedicated to SQL Server related topics, which is designed to help you become familiar with what's out there, how you might use those features or ideas on how you might apply them in your environments. I am Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am Steve Stedman. We are two data professionals trying to help others get a better handle on their database environments, either through this podcast, our training, or our consulting practice. Thanks for joining us on the SQL Trail. Welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Compañeros, welcome to episode 108. It's been a little too long.
It has one of the few months that is. Maybe we did some fun things in August when we weren't on the air, but now it's September and we're back to the weekly schedule.
That's right. Yes, August was very busy for us. I actually ended up taking down a trip to Costa Rica, among other things that sucked up a lot of my time. But yeah, it's nice to be back with you guys.
Yep. And for me, living in the Pacific Northwest, August is one of the few months that we actually almost always have good weather. So I took advantage of that doing some things outdoors.
Yes, that's right. That, living on the water and having a boat, those are the, special ingredients.
Yes, I think I spent more time boating in August than I did the entire rest of the year.
That's right. Had to make that investment worthwhile there.
Yes.
Okay, so our topic today, and this goes back from a request. So Aaron Hayes made this request. Gosh, it's been some time now. So Aaron, we apologize. But his request, he wanted to talk about kind of the future for a lot of folks. Time now. So Aaron, we apologize. But his request, he wanted to talk about kind of the future of the RDBMS, right? So you hear lots of talk about, we've talked about on this program, big data and, NoSQL and all of these kinds of things. And it's, in fact, this conversation was actually, there was like a big Twitter rant and lots of blogs and things about this actually just a couple of weeks ago. And so obviously the topic is not, is very prevalent for a lot of folks. And one of the reasons it took us a while to get this episode together is that I didn't want to have a vendor representative. Anytime you have someone either working on the product, like the project managers, or even, sometimes us as consultants, right? I mean, I admit I'm biased, right? I'm a SQL Server guy, right?
Yes, and so am I.
That's right. And so I want, we want looking at this in a way that we could, talk with them about it in a bit of an objective way. And so Richard Snodgrass was that person. I actually met him at the Ignite conference last year in Atlanta. We've been communicating, and again, through the summer months, we were finally able to get a time to sit down and talk. And so Richard is the research vice president at a company called Directions. Yeah. And so ultimately what he does is helps coach or advise CIO level folks on their technology strategies. And he does quite a bit of work in the data platform space. So I thought it seemed like a very natural fit to have him on the program to kind of give us some of his thoughts around this topic.
Yeah. And keep in mind with Richard that he's not there trying to sell any product or evangelize any specific product. He's there to understand what companies are doing, what they need to utilize any specific product. He's there to understand what companies are doing, what they need and where they're going. And he works with many different database solutions in order to be able to help solve that. So I think his insight in the conversation is very interesting.
That's right. And I think, again, we'll get into it, but obviously because he knows that our crowd is SQL Server focused, he does kind of give us some thoughts around basically some coping mechanisms, if you will, right? And what our future might look like. So I think that you're in for a very interesting conversation.
So do we have any compañeros shout outs?
Oh,
Carlos?
Man, we have a lot of compañero shout outs, and we could probably do a whole episode on compañero shout outs.
Well, it has been a few weeks since we've been on the air, so
yes.
I guess maybe we'll just follow up next week with the new ones then.
Yes, we're going to have to, we apologize. Thank you for all those who have been, talking with us, particularly on the back and the input. For folks like Aaron that are submitting topics, thank you, thank you, thank you. Obviously, if you're listening, we appreciate it. We want to interact with you. And so please don't hesitate. Social media, email, however, whatever format you think is appropriate, reach out to us. We'd be happy to have a conversation with you.
Absolutely.
So because we are now in September, we are now very, very close to the Compañero Conference.
Yes, it's about 4 weeks away, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. We're about a month out by the time this goes live. We'll be about a month out, and we're looking forward to seeing many of you in Norfolk. And again, this is going to be an interesting conference. It is year one for us. There are lots of conference choices, and one of the things we're finding out is that the conference season in the fall is very, very busy for folks, and so we recognize that. But we are looking forward for those. We've had many people, folks, and so we recognize that. But we are looking forward for those. We've had many people sign up from many different organizations, and so it'll be fun to get together, have some discussions about SQL Server. We are making one change, and I guess I hate to use the word change, but we're introducing a topic that was kind of there before, but now I have a better way of describing it. And that is the idea of peer selected sessions, right? So one of the things we're looking to do, and we're going to have a combination of pre-selected topics or sessions, but we're also going to include the ability or have a roundtable with the option of actually asking. It's like, hey, you know what? This is what I'd like to talk about or hear about or whatever, right? And then putting that up, having people vote on it, and then saying, okay, and then actually creating sessions that Wednesday that will be delivered on Thursday. Now,
that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that's really kind of cool with that is that if you get there and you find out that there's a subset of the group that all wants to focus on one topic, those will be the best people to network with because they're the ones who have the same interests or same needs as you do.
No, exactly. That's right. And if there's a topic that you're, or maybe a niche topic, right, that maybe the group as a whole is not so interested in, but there are two of you that are interested in it or have done some things in it, then at least we'll be able to make those connections, right? Yep. And so then over a meal or when we're on the cruise or whatever it is, you'll be able to, hey, strike up that conversation and say, oh, hey, you were the one that was interested in blah, blah, blah. And let's talk about that.
Now, Carlos, do we have a promo code available for the podcast listeners for the conference?
We do have about how your fall's going to spell that. When you're on the website, just go up to the URL, grab Compañero, and you can use that to get $75 off.
And I can use a regular N on my keyboard when I type that in for the
regular N. That's right.
Yeah.
Don't have to worry about the tilde there. So yes, so we hope to see a few more of you down there. Obviously, right? October for most of us is now on the schedule. If you have kids, they're getting back into school. So now you can start thinking about how your fall is going to line up. Let's see. I think it's time for a little SQL Server in the news. So Steve, we've talked about this before, and this actually comes up in our conversation with Andrew, and I thought that I'd go ahead and point it out here. And that is this idea of the Power BI report server or Power BI Premium. I think as it's a kind of a V1 product, there's some marketing language, right, that they have to figure in. So in marketing language, right, that they have to figure out. But basically, this is the ability for you to install Power BI locally.
Right.
So almost like a reporting services, right? So they've introduced this idea of having reporting services and being able to install that separate from the database. So this is the Power BI flavor. And one of the things that they've introduced is that we now have a few more options. So in August, they introduced a few more capabilities. So it used to be, again, as a V1, you could only connect to analysis services cubes. But now you can actually interact with Excel workbooks. Now, I'm not exactly sure if that's, showing the Excel workbooks like they did in PowerBI.com. I'm not quite sure if that is, it looks like the integration is all there, but I admit that's not my forte. So I don't want to, they did in PowerBI.com. I'm not quite sure if that is, it looks like the integration is all there, but I admit that's not my forte. So I don't want to, say that all the features are there, but it looks like you can actually import those workbooks and interact with them via the reports, which you weren't able to do earlier.
All right. Interesting. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. So I think this is going to be, again, as we kind of look at the evolution of reporting services and what happens there, a lot of eyes are going to be on this. And obviously we know that Power BI is going to blowing up everywhere. And so this is going to be interesting for a lot of people that have, more than, that can justify the costs of installing it locally and have the number of users to justify that.
Right. And I think also it really sort of echoes the idea that report server is here to stay. Even with Power BI they're kind of bringing them together more as we go forward rather than diverging them.
Sure. I guess I want to caution there that at least right now they're still separate. And this Power BI Premium is still kind of focused on the Power BI capabilities. I think we'll see how that integration continues to play over. But yeah, I think it's happening. Obviously in 2016, we got some of the integration there. I think they're still kind of working some of the kinks out. So that'll probably be something that we see, who knows, maybe even next year.
All right.
Okay.
So the URL for this episode is SQLDataPartners.com/FutureDB for the show notes.
Or SQLDataPartners.com/108 for the episode number. So should we go ahead and jump into the conversation with Andrew?
Let's do it.
This is Carlos Chacon.
I am Steve Stedman.
And I am Andrew Snodgrass.
So Andrew, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks.
Even in our audience, our SQL Server folks, and when we think about SQL Server, we think about a transactional system, right? It's been around for a while, although it's definitely evolved a bit. But one of the common questions that we get is, what about all this unstructured data? Even in SQL Server, now we're starting to see that influx. It started kind of with XML, if you will. Mm-hmm. And now we've got JSON. 2017 is going to have graph databases, Python, R. All of a sudden, we're starting to see this intersection of what we would traditionally think of unstructured and structured data kind of commingling in the same environment. And it has a lot of people questioning, and not to mention the rise of other databases, right? I mean, it's 2017 and Microsoft comes out with a new database technology, and they're not the only ones, right? Their databases, only is going to revolve around this evolution, if you will, and kind of where the transactional system is going to end up, right? So I guess maybe take us through some of your thoughts there and kind of what you're seeing, and maybe even what some of your customers are asking you about the same idea.
Sure. Well, along that lines, I think some of the rise of the unstructured, the big data, semi-structured, all this stuff has come around naturally. And I think that introduction of database tools and other services and capabilities have come about because traditional relational database guys keep trying to force fit unstructured stuff into structured databases. And so these things have come out as a natural result of trying to solve a problem that we weren't able to actually do with SQL Server. And so I don't know that it's necessarily that we're seeing any kind of decline in traditional databases or in the SQL Server. And so I don't know that it's necessarily that we're seeing any kind of decline in traditional databases or in the relational industry that we've always been dealing with. I think those type of workloads continue to exist. I think they're still going to continue to exist. You've still got financial systems, you've still got procurement systems, and these things lend themselves well to a traditional relational structured database model. But they don't do everything. And one of the things that I had always looked at was, how do we handle situations where you need some kind of lightweight database management system? And SQL Server, despite some attempts to give us lightweight database management, didn't always do a good job of it. And so when JSON came about, XML you could say a little bit, but really when JSON came about and the idea of saying, let's go mobile, let's push data out that's self-describing, these seem like natural solutions. And now that we tap those sources, I would necessarily think that SQL Server is trying to be everything, although Microsoft might like to portray it that way.
Right.
Yeah, I think that more is that SQL Server is trying to tap everything. Okay? And so it's one of these things where I've got my traditional product list, my customer list, all my transactions that are in a nice structured environment that work in an application that people know and trust and love. But I need to be able to get into other areas and need to grab data from other areas and push data out to other solutions. And so they're putting these tools into our SQL Server environment so that we can interact with those things more intelligently and more seamlessly. So we don't have to push to an ETL tool, or we don't have to do some kind of extraction and then modify the data to push it out somewhere else and then bring it back. We can kind of put all this thing into one environment and control it there.
We've definitely drunk the Kool-Aid, right? Like, other platforms. Right? I go and try and talk with businesses. I mean, one of the things that I like about this idea is that at least it gives me a common tool set from someone who's been in SQL Server now for 15 years, that I don't have to go out and learn all these other platforms, right? Now, obviously there's some differences, right? Through R or Python. I mean, so there is a learning curve, but at least I know the data's in SQL Server. There are some administrative things that I don't have to relearn, things like that. And I think it will be easier. Well, maybe easier is not the right word, but it gives me the ability on a single platform to have all of that data. I mean, is that a fair idea or a fair approach
I
for
think
these?
it's a fair assessment on it. And I think that from a traditional enterprise standpoint, I think it's very attractive. And
Approach for
these
these
fair assessment on it. And I think that from a traditional enterprise standpoint, I think it's very attractive. And I like it personally as well. Large organizations, medium organizations, anybody that has applications that they've developed over the years where they've invested. This isn't just an investment in skills and application creation and the rest of that, but they actually have servers. And they have licenses and all kinds of other stuff that go along with that. And the idea of saying, if I can take advantage of what I already have and expand on it instead of trying to recreate it, that sounds very attractive. Here's a great analogy on it is there was a similar type of thing when we went from client server to web-based apps, right? Mm-hmm. And there was this need to recreate all these applications so they work in a browser. And wouldn't it have been nice if we could have kept our applications but simply have them work in a browser? Sure. Okay? And that's kind of what we're getting at, capabilities, but we want to extend it. Okay, and that doesn't mean you need to learn how to write web apps, and it does mean you need to learn JSON and convert data, and it does mean that if you want to go to Hadoop, you're going to have to learn Polybase and understand how to do a scale-out compute environment and be able to tap those resources and manage that data, and you might need to learn some MapReduce at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. But this is learning additional things and not replacing what you already have, and that's, I think, part of the attraction of beefing up SQL Server to do more than it was before.
Right.
And I guess the way I've seen this happen a few times as I've talked with different people is that they're using SQL Server. They've been using SQL Server in their shop for years. And then they realize, okay, now we want to do unstructured data, big data, as they oftentimes end up calling it. And they decide that, okay, well, we're going to go with Cassandra or DocumentDB or a CouchDB or DynamoDB. It is SQL Server. And I find that sort of the story goes with those oftentimes is that it's kind of a decision. Are we going to keep doing SQL, or are we going to go with this other database, or are we going to do a merge there, or sort of using both sides of it? And it sounds like what you're describing here is that taking advantage of what's being added into SQL Server so that we don't have to go and look at those other technologies. Is that where you're going?
No, actually, Steve, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think the merge is what's going to happen ultimately. It's kind of like buying a stereo system that's an all-in-one. You basically get a very generic set of components, right? If you really want the best, you buy separate components. And I think what's going to happen is SQL Server is going to be there for traditional structured applications and databases and stuff, but people are still going to be looking at Cassandra, Cloudera, Hadoop, any of these for a true applications and databases and stuff, but people are still going to be looking at Cassandra, Cloudera, Hadoop, any of these for a true multi-processing, parallel processing capability that they really don't want to spend the money to try to make SQL Server do. You know,
Okay.
the idea of that if you go to a big data solution, you have a distributed computing environment with a lot of servers out there, each with some local storage so that the computing, the query happens locally on the data, and you use parallel processing to do a lot of queries across a lot of unstructured data at once to return a set of information. If you try to do SQL Server to do a scale out and that same type of configuration, your licensing cost alone is going to kill you.
Right.
Okay? It doesn't make any sense to say that you're going to have 50 or 1,000 servers, each running a SQL Server Standard or Enterprise Edition license that uses Polybase to go out and tap that unstructured data that's actually in a proper Cassandra or Hadoop deployment. And so if you really need to get into big data, you're going to have to look at a proper big data solution to host the data and run the computes. But you don't have to run those standalone. You don't have to just do a MapReduce to get a data set. Then you have to go through integration services or some other ETL in order to get in with your structured data. You'll be able to do that directly from SQL Server so that you can query your structured information, your product list, your customer list, and you can do sentiment analysis against a bunch of unstructured data out in Cassandra and bring those together in real time. That's where I think the merging and the intelligence is going to be.
Okay,
Interesting.
great.
And I think so. Kind of with that, a common point is like IoT, right? So,
and the intelligence is going to be.
Okay,
interesting.
great.
And I think so. Kind of with that, a common point is like IoT, right? So you're collecting, so all these sensors, right, have all this information. SQL Server probably may not make the most sense for the repository for all of that information, right? But you have, these sensors, or the, caches out on the web, right? Which you can then pull into, Hadoop cluster or, whatever else, and then start to do that aggregation or some of those analytics on it, and then pull in kind of the summary information. And that may be what you store in SQL Server. And then, of course, then there's a reporting on top of, all of that as well.
Yeah, and that follows, Carlos, in the same line with the idea of JSON. It's great that you can do some native JSON stuff within SQL and you can push data out and pull data in. But from a storage cost and compute cost, do you really want to store JSON data in blob columns within a SQL database? You can run into some cost and performance issues here that you might not want to deal with. So I don't think that's necessarily the road with the JSON side either. I think it's store it where it makes sense, where it's optimized and where it belongs. But I want to do stuff with that data and I want to do it in real time. And that's where bringing it into SQL Server and attaching it to business data makes sense.
So then let's talk a little bit about, again, so the effect. Are the data teams just going to get bigger? I mean, so we have like Redis cache and some of these other caching layers that the programmers are kind of already doing, right? So now we start adding, right? So Hadoop, and we've actually done an episode on Polybase. Okay. And of course, now Polybase is still kind of an emerging technology.
Right.
Exactly. Does that mean that I'm now going to have a SQL Server person, I'm going to have a Hadoop person, I'm going to have a Cassandra person? Or are you seeing organizations say, okay, guys, now it's time to go learn Hadoop, and you're going to be responsible for both?
In some, and it depends on the size of the company.
Sure.
The really intelligent ones are investing in a data architecture and saying,
sure.
It isn't a matter just of saying we want big data. Everybody says that to a degree, right?
Exactly.
But how do you do that, and how do you do it without spending too much?
Right. So the plumbing, right? The connections become very, very important, right? How's that data going to move and flow?
Right. And so when are you going to, and the same thing's true now with machine learning. It's great to say that we have R and Python in 2017, but what are you running this against? And what type of performance hits are you going to take on your servers with it? The greatest thing there isn't that suddenly we're a SQL Server. Okay?
Right.
And it's that I'm going to go out to RStudio. I'm going to build my script. I'm going to test it out on my data. I'm going to make sure everything's the right way. And then I'm going to put this into a stored procedure and make it part of my application so that it performs the R script on the data at the right time, and gives my user something useful.
No, exactly. And I think now, so having said that, do you see the role of the Express version increasing in organizations? I mean, I feel like adding some of that functionality to Express was a direct result of the rise of open source, right? And particularly MySQL. And so to that idea, now that I have the capabilities, and when we start talking about creating these models, maybe we don't need 10 years worth of data, right? I need a month's worth, a quarter's worth,
Yeah.
And then I can push that off onto an Express version. Need a month's worth, a quarter's worth,
Yeah.
And then I can push that off onto an Express version, let my data scientist or my analyst or whoever, right, run all the algorithms they want. And then once they've decided, I think this is the way we want to go, then again, kind of that integration. Now it's in SQL Server already. I can just move that into my production environment and have a more seamless experience. Is it?
That's a really interesting question on that. Most of our customers tend to be larger enterprises. And so, they have MSD and Visual Studio subscriptions, and
Gotcha.
Even their data scientists, they're, putting an MSD and Enterprise Edition on or standard and running it from there. I don't know that I know the right answer for that. I think you probably could.
Sure. I mean, there's the limitations that you're going to run into, right?
Sure.
10 gigs or, whatever. But again, it's that I can the flexibility, I get the tools. And so I guess I'm kind of interested to see how that plays off or plays out. Obviously, if you're a Fortune 5,000 company, right? Maybe that doesn't make sense, but
yeah,
for these smaller organizations that have a couple people trying to work on this, it'll be interesting to see what happens, I think.
Well, on that line, opening the door to that one, for some of the customers we have, both large and small, we're seeing the use of Azure services, spinning up capability there, moving data out, testing it out, and then scaling down is a way of getting around local deployments and testing.
Gotcha.
Even to the point of things like Azure SQL Data Warehouse. All of a sudden you've got somebody who has 10 or 15 years or 20 years worth of historical equipment data or performance data, and they push this up to an Azure service and then run one of the analytics services against it. They're doing some machine learning and some bigger analytics that they would never attempt on premises.
Sure. Because once they're done, they can just, toss that out or, spin it down.
Well, and along that lines, right, you've got Azure Data Lake Analytics, which was supposed to be originally just for, going against the Data Lake store environment with a bunch of unstructured data, and all of a sudden they said, well, we could tap into SQL database, we could tap into blob storage, we could tap into data warehouse, and Data Lake Analytics is all based on USQL. And so we've got a really nice environment here for people that are comfortable with traditional SQL Server, query capabilities to go out and run some really cool analytics and learn just a few new functionalities that are required for USQL. And you've got a scalable system out there to run these queries on that you don't have to do on premises.
Yeah, no, it is. It's very cool. Like you mentioned, for the larger organizations, I think, as we start talking with people, there are those who are putting in quite a bit of time to learn the USQL and take a look at data lakes. And I think obviously the bar is lowering.
Yeah.
But that's still an investment, right? To take the time to learn some of those things and understand how they work. So.
Oh yeah.
So I guess like everything, all that technology continues to evolve and change.
So it's interesting because when we had our podcast talking about, building your technical skills a few weeks ago.
Right.
One of the things we talked about was sort of the type of things you can learn that stick around for a long time, and the type of things you can learn that are maybe a little bit riskier, but they may go away or they may change rapidly. And it seems like some of the the unstructured and big data and data warehousing pieces today are kind of in that riskier category because they're still sort of changing quite a bit. And big data and data warehousing pieces today are kind of in that riskier category because they're still sort of changing quite a bit. I mean, are there any of these that you see that are kind of more robust to the point that they're or more mature might be the better word, to the point that they're not changing quickly these days?
Yeah, actually, it's especially with the folks that are going to be listening that are SQL Server folks.
Yep.
Along that line, if you take a look at Microsoft's database landscape and say you've got structured, unstructured, and semi and everything in between, the two that you would go into that are not SQL Server would be Hadoop and JSON. And Hadoop is underpinning so much of the big data investment that Microsoft is into that if you want to stay in SQL Server, you're probably comfortable to start learning Hadoop and understanding that environment.
Okay.
That was the whole concept behind Polybase, was to touch Hadoop. If you actually look at the Polybase scale-out concepts, this is a Hadoop cluster methodology for doing compute nodes. If you look at the Azure services, you've got Data Lake, which is a Hadoop environment on the back end. You've got Cosmos DB, which is actually a Hive environment in the back end. And then you've got HD Insight, which is, multiple Hadoop type clusters that you can choose from there to do any kind of scale out environment you want based on the type of workload. So yeah, if you're SQL Server and you want to look at big data and you want to stay comfortable with Microsoft, you're going to learn Hadoop.
Okay.
Interesting. There you go, compañeros. You've been warned, right? You heard it here first.
Yeah, and while you're at it, learn some Power BI because, God, Microsoft is investing in that.
Oh, yes, that is true. That's true. And well, it's interesting. I think that still kind of goes back to the folks starting to spin up Power BI environments because they're like, hey, really cool reporting tool. The functionality's there, web browser, all that. But then it gets a little too big. And they're like, hey, how do we make this go faster? And you're like,
That's
probably going to need to pull that out of the CSV file, right?
Well, and then you do a Power BI Premium where you got dedicated capacity, or
Sure.
you wind up doing a Power BI report server on premises.
Yeah, that's just coming out, and it'll be interesting to see that integration with reporting services, how that continues to evolve. I wanted to circle back quickly, if we could, because you mentioned Azure. We've actually talked a little bit about containers. Containers, particularly in the the Linux world, has been all the rage. So I'm not sure if competition is the right word, but because ultimately the technology and what they can give you are different. But Azure versus containers. If you're a larger organization and
I'm going to put this out here, especially
made the move to Azure, right, to that whole spin up
Mhm.
kind of throwaway idea, I feel like that's what containers are also trying to provide you. So is it an on-premise Azure competition there when we talk about containers?
Well, yeah, and that's an interesting one. So I'm still, I don't know, maybe I'm too old. I'm still struggling to find out a really good set of examples of doing containerization of apps, and saying we're going to put this out here, especially when it's the database related app. Because it seems like there's an awful lot you got to put in that container in order to make it work. But, it's interesting. In Azure, right, Microsoft's whole move toward Linux anyway, it was SQL Server 2017 coming on Linux and in the containers and all the rest of that. Azure has the Azure Container Services, which has been out there for a little while, year and a half, that allows you to spin up VMs and containerize things and everything in it. But they've also just released a thing that's in preview right now called Azure Container Instances. Okay? And this is one where it's a true platform as a service type. They provide complete control of the infrastructure. So you don't know the back-end VMs. All you do is you say, I need computing resources. I need this many CPUs and this much RAM. And here's my container image. Pow. Put it up there, scale it as much as you want, run it as long as you want, and then kill it. And you don't worry about the VMs or any of the back-end stuff. And so you can throw SQL Server into this. Okay? And you don't know if it's Windows or Linux, and it doesn't really matter because there's a web access to it anyway. Okay?
Right.
You get a URL, and you just run it, and you go for it. And so that's another one of them where Microsoft is trying to say, we don't really care on the platform. We know it's the server and the back-end side of things.
Right. Now, I feel like the best example, and so we had Andrew on the program, different Andrew, talking about containers, and the thinking was, and I guess I'm inclined to believe it, is that at least from a database perspective, and I can't speak to the apps, right? You can do lots of different things with the apps, but the best or the classic case for containers in the database is a development workshop. Or, if you're building like a .com type thing, right? If you're actively doing development, that whole idea of, okay, once you've published or once you've pushed code, okay, now let me take that snapshot, create a container, push that down back to all the developers. So now I know they're developing against what is in production, and to help eliminate some of these, migration issues. And
and that sounds very internal. Absolutely.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think we're quite, although I have heard a few people talking about it, I don't think we're quite saying that we're going to throw containers at production databases just yet. But
yeah, sometimes I hear so much about containers right now, and it takes me back to when we first started hearing about big data, and then about, artificial intelligence, and it's like, oh, I got to get me some of that. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I got to get me some of that.
Yeah. That's right. So I guess, so having said that, right, what you're ultimately with the directions, your organization, you're consulting CIOs on technology choices.
Uh-huh.
Now, obviously, your mileage will vary, right? And it depends, right? It's gonna come into here. But now that we've kind of covered some of these pieces, and I guess you've already mentioned, if you feel comfortable with SQL Server, you feel pretty safe gambling on, covered some of these pieces. And I guess you've already mentioned, if you feel comfortable with SQL Server, you feel pretty safe gambling on Hadoop, or not gambling, but, learning Hadoop, taking the time that could be your next foray.
Mm-hmm.
What else are you advising these executives on in making investments in their data platform?
So the things that we're pushing or talking to people about now is really along the lines of, how do you take advantage of not only big data and machine learning capabilities. So that's one of the things that we tell the folks is not necessarily to jump in, because these guys aren't going to do major investments or major overhauls. These are like organizations that have to plan out years in advance of where they're going to be spending their money and then get authorization for it, and they have to justify it.
Gotcha.
And they're getting a lot of CFOs and other CXOs that are reading too many magazines on air. And so we're trying to show them what Microsoft's approach is with SQL Server and data overall. And in fact, we're doing one here in another week on business analytics and business intelligence, and how is this all working in the vision going forward, and where are the investments happening, and where should you spend your time now, and where should you do it in the future. And so we think machine learning is actually far more mature than people like to think that it is. Okay.
Oh, really?
Especially in a traditional business environment, there's a lot of stuff that's out there that the community has developed over the years, either in R or Python, that, now's the time. If you were ignoring it before or saying we got to wait and see, now's the time to jump into it. The other area that we're telling them to get into is taking a look now at better business intelligence and data source. Jump into it. The other area that we're telling them to get into is taking a look now at better business intelligence and data sources on premises. Okay, this whole Power BI report server, if you guys haven't spent time in it, we're telling them to bring that in and take a look at it. One of the other ones that's kind of surprising is any traditional ETL workloads that you have going on where you've been using integration services for years. ETL's changing. The idea that SQL Server's database engine has the ability to go out and tap these resources in real time and do transformations. Right. You might not be doing ETL the way you did for the last 10 years. Integration services, I don't see it getting a whole lot of investment. I see a lot more going into analysis services, saying we're going to do real-time queries and bring stuff together and transform it there, not in integration services.
Oh, wow.
go out and swap it next month or next year. This is going to be like a multi-year thing of
Sure.
new stuff we bring in. We're actually going to bring in directly. We're not going to run it through an ETL.
Well, now, so you'll forgive me, I guess, maybe it's just that my connections aren't quite there.
Okay.
How am I getting the data? When I think of SSIS, I'm thinking about it is that glue, right, that takes me from my transactional system into my cube, or, it's doing some transformation there for me. There are additional components now. I mean, we've talked about Polybase, but so SSIS, or SSAS rather, the analysis services, now has these connectors to actually go out and grab this information in real time.
2017, baby. Here we go. So analysis services in 2017 supports the M language. So all of a sudden, all the stuff you were doing in Power Query and Excel, and you're bringing stuff in and grabbing different sources and maybe going out and getting a file list instead of just, another data source, that's all coming in 20 services.
Gotcha.
That's all coming in 2017 analysis services.
Gotcha.
And so the big reason for that isn't necessarily to make analysis services more functional, which was kind of a nice outcome from it, but they wanted to bring Power BI. And Power BI is all based on Power Query, right? And so in order to support that with analysis services in the new Power BI report server thing, which is basically reporting services plus, they had to bring in the Power Query engine capabilities.
Okay. So now, so there's another dot connected, because I know with at least the initial version of Power BI desktop, or not that's not the right word. Power BI, whatever. So the new version that you can download and install, locally, that only supports connections to SSAS. And I guess it makes more sense now if SSAS has a bit more for you to take advantage of, some of these other data sources. Because I think initially when I looked at that, I thought, that's going to be all cube data. Nobody's going to want to do that. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not. So what you wind up with is Power BI report server when you bring it down, right? And you install it. And basically we're calling that reporting services plus. Okay. Because it really is the same thing, right? It's just, there's a few other things. You're on a modern life cycle for updates, which I don't particularly like, but that's the reality on it. But you can host your PBIX files, right? And so you've got that capability, but the PBIX files, that's the only one that's limited right now. The rest of the RDL stuff and KPIs and all the rest are full capability. So the PBIX files that you have there can only go through an analysis services cube, which actually winds up being your gateway, which then you have to think of, in that scenario, analysis services being like SSIS. It's the glue that goes out and grabs everything and brings it in, right? Now that's the first release of Power BI report server.
Sure. Gen 1.
Right. Hosting, right. And so you'll see that expand, and they're going to go to all kinds of data sources for PBIX files. So I don't expect that to be limited for more than a few months.
Okay. Very good. Okay.
Interesting.
So, Andrew, thank you so much for visiting with us. Great conversation. I wish we could go on for a bit longer, but I know that we need to wrap it up here. I guess last thoughts, Steve, you have any last questions? Or
No, I think that there's just a lot going on in this space, and keeping on top of it's going to be interesting. I think, like we're talking about with Power BI, so Microsoft is investing so much in Power BI these days that everything it touches is sure to expand down the road in the near future. So I think that's a pretty safe bet.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of interesting things to come here in the near future.
That's right.
If you guys have...
For this conversation, we wanted to have somebody who was obviously familiar, kind of covering that beat, if you will, but didn't work for Microsoft. And
they're not even a customer of ours.
Okay.
Yeah, and so just to see how that continues to play out, and I think we touched on it a bit, but we as database administrators, we have our homework cut out for us, and I think it'll be fun to see how that continues to evolve as time goes on. Should we go ahead and do SQL Family?
Let's do that. So, Andrew, how did you first get started using SQL Server?
So up until 2008, I was really kind of a Sybase guy. I know, it takes me back a while.
Yeah.
We had a need for standalone database engines, and I did not.
So, Andrew, how did you first get started using SQL Server?
So up until 2008, I was really kind of a Sybase guy. I know, it takes me back a while.
Yeah.
We had a need for standalone database engines, and Sybase was one of the early ones that allowed you to have a decent relational database environment that you could have on a separate machine. We had a bunch of travelers, so they needed that locally. And I did not want to go into Access or Fox Pro, which is where we originally started. So we were Sybase, and then as things progressed, we saw the direction for SQL Server, and that became our standard, and we moved over in 2008 and never looked back.
Okay.
There you go.
Interesting.
Now, as you've been covering SQL Server since then and working with it, if you could change one thing about SQL Server, what would it be?
Yeah, you don't like this. I changed Management Studio, actually. I think the thing that would benefit them is if they would make it easier for new entrants. One of the things that I find that's most difficult with new developers and new database people we bring in isn't learning SQL or learning database structures. They're getting all kinds of education on that. But setting it up, accessing it, using it, it's like, some wizard, something in there for the new guys to be able to get in and use it would be nice.
Sure. So kind of updating that almost to like a web type interface, right? Where it's a little more intuitive. We have all those buttons everywhere and you're like, okay, what the heck am I looking at?
Yeah. And they've got some stuff in this and it's nice, but a few years back, we would take new people and say, if you really want to see how to build a query on this, let's do this in Access. Okay. And see this nice little wizard where you draw all these tables together and then, oh, look at that. Got a great query. Yep. The query works. Now drop it into Management Studio and run it as a query there. Look.
Interesting.
Very good point. And I think, personally, I love what you can do with Management Studio, but I have definitely seen the challenge when you have someone who's first time ever using it. They sort of get dumped in and don't know where to go. There's this huge hierarchy in the tree view on the left side that you can expand. And how do I get to write a query? It can be a little bit daunting in the beginning.
Oh, yeah. The wizard for setting up jobs is nice. Being able to go through and take a look at especially some of the new views and performance capabilities. This is all great stuff. But I got new people that we'd like to get ingrained in this. Just to make their lives a little easier so they get addicted as well.
Yep. All right. So what is the best piece of career advice that you've received?
Early on, someone told me, don't get worked up about office politics. They said, look, focus on doing a good job, and the people you really want to work for will notice that and promote you, and those who don't care about the good work you do, focus on doing a good job, and the people you really want to work for will notice that and promote you, and those who don't care about the good work you do aren't the people you want to work for anyway.
Good things will come to those who wait.
Well, yeah, and if they don't, then you're in the wrong place.
Sure. Yeah, and then think of all the time that you don't have to spend, worrying and I won't use the word gossiping, but talking about, oh, what are they going to do? And, I don't like this person and yada, yada.
Exactly, yeah. Just don't worry about it. Just go do your job.
Very good. I like it.
That's one of the things I like about on the consulting side is that you're there to do the job and not to be in the politics. And
yep.
I like being on that side of it.
Andrew, our last question for you today. If you could have one superhero power, what would it be and why do you want it?
So I know he gets ridiculed all the time, especially on Big Bang, but I really like Aquaman. His ability to breathe underwater so that I could basically go scuba diving without any kind of limits. That would kind of, the telepathy part is cool too, but, this ability to breathe underwater, that's my thing.
There you go.
Hey, if you figure that out, let me know. I'll go with you.
Yeah, yeah, but not around here. It's too cold. We're going to go south.
So I said that would be the last question, but I was one follow-up. Where is your favorite place to scuba dive then?
It's got to be the Caribbean. Basically anywhere. Grand Cayman, 7 Mile, off the coast of Mexico, Cozumel, any of it. Just go down about, 70 to 100 feet and forget the world exists. And
you're there. Wow.
Yeah.
Andrew, thanks so much for talking with us today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, you bet, guys. That was a lot of fun.
So, Steve, after we got done with this interview, I think we both agreed that there are several additional things that we probably should have. There are several additional things that we probably should have brought up. and we could probably revisit this topic again.
Right. We could do many more episodes on this. I think.
That's right. Maybe we'll reach out and even try to do something like a panel type idea. Aaron had a couple of additional questions that we didn't quite get to in the interview, and I thought maybe we'd throw those out and at least give our 2 cents here based on our experience or our thoughts here. So I think ultimately the idea of some of these other databases, who are the winners and the losers? Tough to say, right? I mean, that's kind of anybody's guess. Kind of almost harkens back to our conversation with Eugene, right? Is that they need to stick around, right? Give them a year or 18 months.
Right.
Right. If you still hear those names after that long, right, then you can start kind of paying attention.
Yeah. And the danger there really is if you jump on one of those new,
come around because they're trying to serve a niche. And I think the trouble or the issue is that once you have a niche, you can get really good at that niche, but then there's all the other things that the database has to do, even boring things like high availability, right? And so grabbing on to one of those other databases because it has this feature set, you'll have to go through the process of identifying, okay, well, what is it, or what specific functionality can I get out of this database technology? And then how does it fit into the rest of my data ecosystem?
And I really like to think about that as what are the tools that you already have in your tool belt and what are the things that you're missing?
Right.
For instance, if there's a specific need that you want to go use a NoSQL database for that's going to help maybe reduce the load or offload something from your relational database, that might be a great thing to do.
Yeah, so I think that through the system.
Need that you want to go use a NoSQL database for that's going to help maybe reduce the load or offload something from your relational database, that might be a great thing to do.
Yeah, so I think that role of from an administration perspective is going to evolve a bit into some architecture, right? Meaning, how does that data hop through the system, right? Andrew brought up the idea of, Hadoop and Polybase, right? We know that Polybase, we had Kevin Fiesel on this program, who incidentally is going to be at the Compañero conference as well. He talked about that's going to be connecting with other systems, right? And so again, I think as you think about, okay, the data comes in to this database for this X reason, this niche reason, right? Then how does it come in and, live in my reports and, get escalated or stored or just get adopted, in there. I think that not to say, I think there are plenty of people out there using Hadoop, right? It's not like everybody's using it.
Right.
Right. And so as we get more connections, then Polybase will become more and more important.
It was really interesting when we did this interview prior to talking with Richard, looking at our agenda and things. I kind of felt like the call was going to be, or the discussion was going to be around how relational databases are going to be dead.
Right.
And because there's, a lot of the sort of big data or NoSQL people are trying to kind of maybe push that a little bit. But by the end of the conversation, I realized that's really not the case. I think the relational databases are just going to keep growing. These other things will come in to help them out along the way with things that those niche or specific needs. But the relational database is nowhere near end of life, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. No.
To help them out along the way with things that those niche or specific needs. But the relational database is nowhere near end of life, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. No, that's right. And so this will be a topic I think we should revisit, in the future and see how this continues to evolve and how organizations kind of respond to that and what they're asking us as administrators to do more of and do less of.
Absolutely.
So closing thoughts?
Overall, relational databases seem to year after year be getting bigger and growing more, and cost and amount of work associated with those increasing. And these other databases are coming in and helping out. And I think it's yet to be seen as to whether they will help overall with the cost. Mm-hmm. But they may help with specific needs. And I think that's a really great thing to have available. Sure.
Well, again, that's kind of one of the roles that we as administrators, can have. And I think obviously Microsoft's made that a little bit easier now with eliminating some of the standard and enterprise. I think we as administrators could probably do a better job of understanding the cost. And this kind of goes again to the business, right? Understanding business requirements and then aligning the technology with those business requirements. I feel like we've talked about this before. And money and, not spending a ton of money is any business's priority.
Right.
And I think we play an interesting role in some of that, right? In how we either express or talk about our technology choices.
Yes. And I think that that's one of those things that oftentimes gets overlooked, but I think that being a little bit more on with how changes are going to affect pricing will certainly help businesses.
That's right.
In the bottom line there.
That's right. Okay, our music for SQL Server in the News is by Mansardian, used under Creative Commons. If you want to reach out to us, you can do so on social media. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. I am at Carlos L. Chacon. LinkedIn, I am at Carlos L. Chacon.
And you can find me on LinkedIn as Steve Stedman. And we'll see you on the SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners.